Well, after years of planning an overhaul to the Skyway, city transportation officials are just now spending $7 million on a feasibility study. Here to help us understand why, I'm joined by Action News anchor and investigative reporter Emily Turner. Hi, Emily.
Hey, how are you?
Good. Nice to see you. So, you recently did a special investigative special specifically on JTA because you've been doing so much reporting for the last year and a half on this agency from a variety of angles. But let's start, if we can, with just the most recent news that we've learned. I'm guessing that I am not the only one surprised to learn that this project is still at a stage where it's still just a possibility.
I mean, well, what's so ironic about this is, yeah, it's still a possibility, except for there's money codified in legislation dedicated to it. There is no price tag, there is no scope, there is no timeline on it. And yet, 240 plus $1 million of our local option gas tax is codified in legislation to go to it. And so that's kind of the big question mark is, did we put the cart in front of the horse on that? So if I may, let me just explain to listeners who may not understand what this project is,
Yeah.
because it's largely gone, um, like, in the background. It's affectionately called the U2C, the Ultimate Urban Corridor, and the whole point of it is to use autonomous vehicles, convert the Skyway. There's 3 different phases of it. The first phase is currently in the works. It's the Bay Street Innovation Corridor. That's a 3.2-mile loop downtown, that goes from headquarters in La Villa of JTA, down Bay Street, down by the soon to be Four Seasons, and back.
And that is separate and distinct from what we call the Skyway.
Right. That is, so technically, it's all part of this larger. In theory, they're supposed to be linked up, right? Is it starts with Bay Street Innovation Corridor, then you convert the Skyway into an elevated autonomous vehicles roadway, which is what we'll get to in just a second. And then the third phase is that they then deploy these autonomous vehicles into neighborhoods. So phase two, which is the conversion of the Skyway, is the biggest price tag. And what's happening now is they're just now doing a feasibility study. Now they put it out to bid already. And
Converting. And when you say convert, you're talking about creating ramps, basically on ramps from the ground level up to the existing Skyway.
right. So right now it's basically a monorail, and what they would need to do is convert a monorail into an elevated roadway. They'd have to find a way to make these vehicles get from the elevated roadway down to an actual road. And so in theory, it might be easy, but it's actually quite a big undertaking, because if you look at the Skyway, I mean, it's not a road. You'd have to redo all of this, gosh, when was it? 80s, late 80s infrastructure, and convert it into an elevated roadway. They put out to bid kind of the first gander of what is this going to look like. They awarded it then in the spring, they pulled it back.
This is the Jacksonville Transportation
The
Authority.
Jacksonville Transportation Authority. Well, then they put it out to bid again. That's what they just awarded.
What did they why did they pull out their I mean, if the completed project was what they bid out and then pulled back?
Phase two, the conversion of the Skyway, they put out a bid. HNTB won, and then and the board voted on it. David Bauerlein, the Times Union, did a story on it, and then to very little fanfare, in the spring they canceled it, and then they put it out to bid again.
Did
So the
they
question is,
offer an explanation as to why they canceled
well,
it?
if you look, because I've got both of them, a copy of both of them. The first one is this like massive document. The second one is much smaller. There's one word that's very different that's in the second one that's not in the first. Alternative. And it's about alternative plans. So they basically, the first one has all this scope, all of these. I mean, it's a massive document that had to have a zip file. The second one, it was just an easy attachment. And you can find that basically what is the alternative to converting the Skyway. It's almost like, and I haven't, they won't talk to me about this because I did reach out to them, but they have not responded. It's almost like they thought, oh, perhaps this isn't feasible, or at least not in the way that we anticipate or want to do it. So what are the alternatives to converting the Skyway? Which, mind you, money's already dedicated to converting the Skyway. So
Yes, I was gonna ask, I mean, what flexibility do they have? As you said, the voters voted on a gas tax increase, which is that money that you said is codified now into law, obligated to this project.
240, I think $248 million specific to the conversion of the Skyway.
But there's also a huge amount of federal funding that's gone into it or is tied into it in one way or another, right?
Well, so that depends. So that's the first phase because that's the reason it's kind of complicated, right? It's this three-phase project that in theory it starts on Bay Street that goes up into the conversion of the Skyway and then goes into the neighborhoods. But they've broken it up into three parts because it's funded differently. So phase one is the Bay Street Innovation Corridor that's funded by a combo of state, local, and federal money. Realistically, the vast majority of the money that's been spent is local. The only money they've gotten reimbursed on this $66.6 million phase one is like $1.5 million from the feds. The state's paid nothing. The rest of it is us as taxpayers. And if they don't get reimbursed by the deadline, then local taxpayers are going to have to foot that bill too. And but phase two, they've gotten grants for some feasibility stuff. I mean, smaller, maybe $1 million here or there. There is no big federal grant for phase two. Phase two is fully funded by you and me
With the gas tax.
with the gas tax and then whatever else JTA decides to allocate to it.
So the idea that they are still formulating a plan, I mean, what is the reason that the board is being told? What are they voting on in terms of making a decision to obviously they're not voting to go back to the drawing board. They're working in an alternative. And I guess they're doing that because they must create some alternatives to this project.
Well, I mean, the whole thing's really complicated because you're using a piece of infrastructure that was built by a federal grant, which is the Skyway. And how many times, if you're from Jacksonville, have you heard, well, like, we can't close it down because you have to pay the feds back? And that is a possibility, right? In the grant, there's a certain longevity that said technology needs to last, and if we don't use it as it's stipulated or repurpose it, then we have to pay the feds back. So the option that JTA has gone for is converting the Skyway. So that's kind of been the narrative is like, well, I guess we could continue subsidizing the Skyway as it is, which is falling apart. They don't even make the Bombardiers who makes the car. I mean, they don't even make Skyway stuff anymore. Or we convert it into something different. And that's kind of been their pathway. What's happened, though, is the technology hasn't developed as quickly as this project is progressing, which is to say not very quickly at all. With phase one, that's kind of what we've seen with the autonomous vehicle. It's not an autonomous vehicle.
Yeah, I mean, I think the last time we had you on, you were reporting about the fact that JTA was now acknowledging that initially that autonomous vehicle phase was actually going to be a manned vehicle.
Right. And if anybody's driven around Riverside or La Villa, I guess it would have been last month or the month before last, they kind of had it out running in a circuit for during the lunch hour. It's a Ford Transit van that has a driver in the front seat. And then they've converted it to put this autonomous vehicle technology on it, but federally, you're not allowed to use it autonomously. I mean, so it will be less reliable than if it were a car that were just being driven because this technology doesn't work in anything like regular rain or the dark, etc.
If you're just joining us, we're talking to Emily Turner from Action News. She has been reporting on JTA and their U2C project. If you'd like to join our conversation, you can give us a call at 904-549-2937. You can also email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. We have a call from Cliff in Riverside. Good morning, Cliff. Go ahead.
Good morning. So there's two really relatively low lifts that could ignite the ridership, I think, of the Skyway. And one is the maintenance station that's right there on the ground level by the Fresh Market and all that infrastructure that we just built. Why couldn't that be converted into a station? Then you go get your groceries, you hop on, and then you're immediately in downtown. So the other one, and there's also the McCoy's Creek that they're working on. I drew all these, you could turn that into a little path with a footbridge. And then you've got that loss of La Villa. Those people could walk through this nice little park, do their shop, or whatever. Just connect. You got to make connections. The next one would be, this one's a little more fantastical, but the FSCJ, the old Rosa Parks stops right when it gets to State and Union, which State and Union basically amputates Springfield's financial nutrition from the downtown campus. If that could just go across the road and students could enter and exit downtown, that'd be pretty cool. I would really like to see FSCJ campus move into the Stanton building, which is like a school building that's historic and beautiful. And then that building would be turned into like a shopping mall. Then you just like, if you're living in Springfield, you ride your bicycle and go shopping, and then you get on the Skyway station, you scoot into downtown. The problem
Interesting.
with downtown,
Cliff,
yeah.
thank you. I'm just gonna let Emily respond to that. I mean, obviously, there's other ideas percolating out there. Is the JTA considering anything like
I
that?
mean, Cliff's got all the plans for downtown. So when it comes to the Skyway, the problem with expanding it is, again, they don't even make these cars anymore. I mean, they have to cannibalize the other cars just to fix the maintenance on this. So from a technology standpoint of the Skyway, that doesn't make sense. There's got to be something where it's like, do you just let this thing limp along? You're certainly not going to invest more money in expanding this thing as it exists. So JTA's thought was, well, let's convert it, and then it will potentially go somewhere. So that's their thought. But the problem is the technology and the price tag to convert it is astronomical, and the technology isn't really there. And the question is, it still doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah, it doesn't go anywhere. I mean, it's 2.5 miles at its length, and initially when it was built, it was kind of always, I think, viewed as a giant white whale, or
Well, and I mean, if you look at it, it's like, okay, so, and the number I get, depending on who you ask, is different. How much you have to pay the feds back if we don't, if we like were to tear it down or not use it. It's like anywhere from 90 million, 117 million. I've heard up to 176 million, and that benchmark moves depending on who's saying it. But we have spent, number one, to convert it, we would spend twice that. Number two, we have spent more than double that at this point subsidizing it. I mean, they pay. I wish I had the budget in front of me. I haven't looked at it in a while, but I mean, it's tens of millions of dollars that JTA puts towards the Skyway just to make it operational.
and we should say, I mean, it's never had much ridership. Those numbers went up some years ago when they made it free
Mhm.
to use the Skyway. I'm not sure what the current numbers suggest, but it is always been said that it's probably would be cheaper to buy cabs for people taking the Skyway than to build this, or for the cost of the project.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. I mean, and the numbers of ridership are questionable anyway because the way they count is the turnstiles at the base of the as you're going in, but many people will just go through the turnstile to use the sockets for charging their phone. The folks who, like homeless
Unhoused people.
folks who are down there, or to just get out of the rain or whatever. Um, and so we've spent so much money keeping this thing operational or somewhat operational that really, I mean, just it's so unused. Think about it. They shut the whole thing down on a weekend and had a rave at three different stops. They threw a house music party at three different stops on a weekend.
I remember we had a fellow on who was doing the event, who was, like,
Yeah, I mean, it's
sponsoring the
super
event.
cool, but like that's how useless this thing is that nobody
Cared.
was nobody was mad.
Yeah.
Like, can you imagine if they shut down the New York City subway and we're like, sorry, we're gonna have a party? People would lose their mind. There's no way. But here in Jacksonville with the Skyway, they're like, cool.
Yeah. And so, given the sunk costs of this project are enormous, I mean, what are the feds saying? You say that who you ask, the answer of how much we would have to pay the feds back depends on who you ask. But is anybody actually asking the federal government, like, hey, are you going to come calling if we just pull the plug on this project?
So my understanding is that is a conversation that's being had. Um, and if JTA is in fact going to try and get out of this money they owe the federal government, they need to get on it now because they're going to have much better luck with this administration than the next. And I mean, but whether or not they forgive it, I don't know. I don't know enough about federal transportation to know have they ever actually come calling and saying, "Oh no, we're going to take our money back or you're going to make us pay it back." I don't It feels like a really bad policy move. It also isn't a great look for Jacksonville to be like, "Thanks for giving us all this money and now we're going to not use it." But you're kind of stuck now in this position where it's like you either throw good money after bad
A lot.
A lot of good money after bad. And the thing is, just because $248 million is what's dedicated to it doesn't mean that's all that's going to go there. Like $248 million plus, if they can't get fully reimbursed from the Fed, so like let's just say $60 million. I mean, that's uh, for every Jacksonville citizen, what, a couple $100 that we're going to pay for this autonomous vehicle system that we probably will never ride. And is it worth it? And then, but on the same token, like, do we continue to pay to fund the Skyway that nobody uses?
So after this recent vote where they said, we're going to put this contract out, we're going to assign this contract to look at possible alternatives. What will happen now?
So HNTB will basically take a look at what they're going to do a whole study. There's an environmental study. There's going to be a feasibility study. What is the impact to downtown? And then they'll come back with their idea of how big of a lift is this going to be. I mean, hopefully, what they're paid to do is to give JTA and the taxpayer and the board of JTA a really clear picture of just, is this a good idea? And if this isn't a good idea as it is designed now, what can we do instead? And one of the options is a no build. Now, that's federally required in a grant to just say, well, maybe we don't do anything at all. That's not usually an option. But in this situation, it very well could be, because it may just be totally unrealistic to do anything.
Emily Turner, we are lucky for your reporting. It's so important to have eyes on agencies like this, and I appreciate all the work that you've done. We're going to include a link to your half-hour special on JTA on our website if you want to look at it. It is a really great deep dive into all of these things plus more. So, Emily Turner, thanks so much for being here.
Yeah.